I still remember the way she stirred her coffee that morning. Slow, casual, like she wasn't about to destroy everything we'd built over 8 long years. "Harold, can we talk?" she asked, not even looking up. I should have known right then. When Jeannie uses that tone, it means she's already made a decision. "Your input is just for decoration." I nodded, tightening the belt of my worn-out robe. We'd been struggling financially. I worked 2 jobs, one as a school janitor, the other delivering groceries at night. Meanwhile, Jeannie worked as a high-level executive assistant for a wealthy, twice-divorced CEO named Burke Wentworth. The kind of man who orders steaks rare and people even rarer. She finally looked up, eyes calm, voice steady. "I want to have a baby." My heart skipped. We'd talked about it before, always postponed it, said we'd wait until we had a house, savings, something. But then she added, "Not with you." I thought I misheard. "I what?" "With Burke," she clarified, like she was discussing switching brands of toothpaste. "He's willing. He wants a child, and I want financial stability. He's offered full support. A trust fund. A home. This would secure our future, Harold. All 3 of us." I stared at her like she was a stranger. She kept talking about efficiency, about upward mobility, even threw in a line about how love was outdated, especially in this economy. I felt like a ghost at my own kitchen table. "I know this is a lot," she said, sipping her coffee, "but if you really love me, you'll support this decision." I didn't speak. I couldn't. The woman I loved, the woman I once walked 5 miles through a blizzard to bring soup to when she had the flu, had just told me she wanted to have another man's baby for the money. And somehow, I was supposed to be okay with that? I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just nodded slowly and whispered, "Okay." She smiled. But inside, something in me cracked. I was done being the quiet, obedient man. If she wanted a future with her boss, I'd give her one she'd never forget. That night, I didn't sleep. Jeannie curled up beside me like nothing had changed, like she hadn't dropped a nuclear bomb on our marriage over lukewarm coffee. I lay stiff as a corpse, eyes glued to the cracked ceiling, counting the seconds between her every breath. I kept waiting to wake up, to roll over and find her snoring, drooling into her pillow, whispering something about grocery lists in her sleep. But the nightmare was real. My wife wanted a child with another man, and I was supposed to applaud her ambition. Around 3 a.m., I got up and sat in the living room in my boxers, surrounded by the smell of stale carpet and disappointment. I stared at the wedding photo on the wall. Jeannie, radiant in a champagne dress, holding my hand like she actually meant forever. I remember how she used to smile at me, not out of politeness, not for convenience, but the kind of smile that said, "You're mine, and I'm lucky for it." I hadn't seen that smile in years. And somehow, I had blamed myself. Maybe I wasn't ambitious enough. Maybe I was too soft, too average, too Harold. But now I realized, Jeannie wasn't losing interest. She was outgrowing me like an old coat. I was useful until I wasn't. The next morning, I asked her a question I never thought I'd hear myself say. "So how would it work?" She blinked. "You mean the baby?" I nodded. My voice shook. "Would I raise him?" She smiled like I'd offered her a rose. "That's the spirit, Harold. That's what I love about you. Your understanding." Understanding. That word scraped against my skull. She went on to explain Burke's plan. They'd do IVF. No messy affair. How classy of them. Burke would handle all the medical expenses, and when the baby was born, they'd draft an agreement. I could be the public father for appearances, but biologically, the baby would belong to her and her boss. "And you'll still be my husband," she said, brushing my hand. "Legally, it's just simpler that way." Simpler for whom? I smiled. Because in that moment, I knew I had to become someone else. Someone who didn't cry into pillows or clutch wedding photos like life preservers. I had to play the long game. Let her think I was okay with it. Let her believe I was weak, spineless, forgiving. Because when people underestimate you, they never see the knife until it's in their back. Jeannie began nesting within days. It started with her clearing out the second bedroom, my little makeshift sanctuary where I kept my books, my model trains, and the dusty old keyboard I still played when the world got too loud. She didn't ask. She just did it. "Harold, we need space for the nursery," she said, dragging my old lamp down the hallway like a corpse. I stood there, watching her dismantle pieces of me, one by one. The train set went into boxes. My high school yearbooks, thrown into a plastic bin labeled clutter. I guess I didn't realize until then how disposable I really was to her. She decorated the room in neutral tones, beige walls, soft gray curtains, little silver stars dangling from the ceiling. Gender neutral is more modern, she chirped, like she was reading from a Pinterest post. She ordered baby furniture online with his credit card, smiled when the packages arrived, and moaned about the delivery men being too slow. And every time she called him, "Burke, darling, yes, the crib arrived today." I had to swallow bile and smile. But here's the thing. I started keeping a journal. Not to vent. That's what I used to do, before I grew a spine made of spite. No, this journal was for planning. In one corner of our home, she was building her fantasy. In another, I was sketching her downfall. I logged every conversation, every receipt, every dollar she accepted from Burke, every call. I took pictures of her texts when she wasn't looking. I recorded her voice when she spoke about wanting the baby to have his nose. She was so busy with her fairy tale, she didn't even notice I'd stopped talking. It's funny. The less I said, the more she praised me. "You're finally evolving, Harold. This is what a modern marriage looks like." "No, Jeannie. This is what a perfect trap looks like." Because I knew something she didn't. Burke's company had a strict morality clause, one that specifically forbade internal relationships resulting in public compromise or reputational harm. And I had the evidence. But I wasn't going to strike yet. No, I needed her deeper in the lie. I needed her to celebrate the betrayal before I burned the house of cards down around her. I smiled politely as she showed me baby name lists. I even suggested one myself. "Ezekiel," I said. "It means God strengthens." She rolled her eyes and said it sounded biblical and boring. But I clung to that name like armor. Because strength was all I had left. It was Jeannie's idea to bring me to the ultrasound. "People need to see us together," she said, spritzing her wrist with Burke's favorite cologne. Yes, his. As if I were just an accessory to her charade. "It's good optics. Especially if we bump into someone from Burke's circle." I didn't argue. I just nodded and ironed my only good shirt. The clinic smelled like antiseptic and ambition. The waiting room buzzed with quiet excitement. Young couples holding hands. Hopeful fathers studying screens. But I wasn't like them. I wasn't a father-to-be. I was a placeholder. When the nurse called our names, Jeannie linked her arm through mine like we were prom sweethearts. Her grip was tight, almost rehearsed. "Smile," she whispered through clenched teeth. "This is important." In the darkened room, the screen came alive with a grainy flutter. A heartbeat. A flicker of life. The nurse cooed. Jeannie beamed. I felt nothing. Not because there wasn't life on that screen, but because it didn't belong to me. That tiny figure floating in her womb was his. Burke's. The man who had everything. Money, power, a corner office with a view, and now, the woman I once thought I'd grow old with. But I played my part. I reached for Jeannie's hand. I smiled for the nurse. I even said the words, "It's beautiful." Because the more convincing I was, the more reckless she became. Later that evening, as we sat on the couch eating takeout, Jeannie casually scrolled through her phone, laughing at something Burke had texted her. "He says we should name the baby after his grandfather." "Prescott," she giggled. "Can you imagine?" "Sounds fancy," I murmured, chewing rubbery lo mein. She looked at me for a moment. Just a flicker, maybe checking if I'd snap. But I didn't. I sipped my soda and changed the subject. That night, I watched her sleep, belly barely showing, face calm. And I realized something unsettling. She genuinely believed I was okay with all of this. She thought I was too passive, too weak to fight back. That I was so desperate to keep her, I'd raise another man's child and thank her for the privilege. But inside me, something darker had taken root. I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to confront. I was going to document, build, and detonate. And it would be glorious. But first, I needed Burke to trust me too. I never thought I'd sit across from the man who destroyed my marriage and pretend to enjoy his company. But there I was, Thursday afternoon, pressed shirt, polite smile, waiting for Burke Wentworth to finish chewing his imported seed base at a restaurant where a glass of water cost more than my shoes. "I'm glad you reached out," he said, dabbing his lips with a silk napkin. "I'll admit, I didn't expect it." I shrugged. Jeannie and I talked. If this is our future, I'd rather we all be aligned. Burke's eyes sparkled like he'd just won a bet. He leaned forward, oozing confidence. "You're handling this with more maturity than most men could. That's rare." Maturity. What a funny word coming from a man who seduced another man's wife behind a mahogany desk. I took a sip of my water and smiled. I figure it's better than being left out of the equation. I want what's best for Jeannie, and for the baby. He nodded approvingly. "You're a good man, Harold." Jeannie said that. I almost choked. Instead, I laughed softly. Yeah, that's me. The good man. The rest of the lunch was a blur of pleasantries, power talk, and rich man jargon I pretended to understand. He spoke of legacy, stocks, European wine, and how children sharpen a man's purpose. The same child he planned to raise through me. What Burke didn't know was that I was recording the entire conversation through a pin in my shirt pocket, a gift from my brother, who used to work security before his drinking got the better of him. One tap at the top, and every arrogant word was stored. Because this wasn't just a social call. This was evidence. After the check came, which, of course, Burke paid with a signature flourish, he clapped me on the back like we were college buddies. You're going to make this easy, Harold. That means a lot. Easy. That word haunted me the entire drive home. Jeannie greeted me at the door, barefoot, glowing. So? How'd it go? Great, I said, hanging up my coat. He's everything you said. She beamed like a teenager with a crush. He is, isn't he? I wanted to scream. I wanted to shatter every plate in the house and ask her if she remembered who paid for that first apartment when she was unemployed and lost. If she remembered crying in my arms the night her mother died. If she remembered us at all. But I said none of that. Instead, I kissed her forehead. Because when people believe you've accepted defeat, they leave their backs unguarded. And I was almost ready to strike. A week after my lunch with Burke, Jeannie surprised me with an invitation to attend their private baby registry event. I almost laughed. It wasn't even a real party, just a gathering at Burke's home with a few of his close friends, a catered lunch, and a digital slideshow of gifts people could reserve for the baby. Jeannie described it like it was some sort of holy ceremony. You being there shows unity, she said, placing my old tie against my shirt to check the match. It tells people we're all on the same page. Right. The page where I play doting husband to a child that shares none of my DNA, fatherhood outsourced to a billionaire ego in a tailored suit. But I went, because I wanted to see the house. Burke's mansion was exactly what you'd expect from a man with 2 ex-wives and a PR team. Cold. Modern. The kind of place where nothing felt touched or lived in. Jeannie glided through the rooms like she belonged there. Hand on her barely there bump, laughing like she hadn't just gutted her marriage and hung my heart on a hook by the door. I followed her like a trained pet. People smiled politely at me. I got a lot of those "I've heard so much about you" looks, but no one knew what to say. I wasn't Burke's colleague. I wasn't Jeannie's coworker. I was the husband, the guy in the way. During the gift presentation, Jeannie took the mic. This child will have everything, she said proudly. Because he will be born from love, understanding, and progress. This isn't a conventional family. It's a conscious one. I clapped. Loudly. Like an idiot. Then came my moment. Burke pulled me aside near the bar. You're a real team player, he said, offering me a drink. Not many men could do what you're doing. I'm not most men, I said. Clearly. Jeannie's lucky. I let the silence hang for a moment before leaning in, eyes low. You know, I've been thinking about your company. All this progress you two are making. I imagine some shareholders might find the situation complicated. His smile faltered. What do you mean? I shrugged, sipping my drink. You've got a child coming with your assistant who's still married to someone else. It's modern, sure, but to certain people, it might look unprofessional. He stiffened, then smirked. No one will know. We've kept everything clean. Of course, I said, tapping my glass against his. That's what I'd expect from a man like you. What I didn't tell him was that I already had screenshots of flirtatious office messages, timestamps of late-night meetings at hotels billed under Burke's corporate card, and photos of them leaving clinics together, with Jeannie wearing her company badge. I had enough to bury them both in the court of public opinion. And I wasn't even done collecting. That night, Jeannie climbed into bed, humming. Wasn't today amazing? I just nodded, heart beating like a war drum. We were weeks away from the baby shower, and I had plans for that day. Big ones. The baby shower was set for a Saturday. Jeannie called it the crescendo of our beautiful chapter. I called it the funeral for my former life. I didn't say that aloud, of course. I just smiled, vacuumed the living room, and pretended to care about which shade of pastel the cupcakes would be. Jeannie was glowing, or at least, that's what everyone said. She looks radiant. Some woman in a pantsuit whispered to her husband as they entered. I was holding the door at the time, like a doorman. In my own house, the guest list was full of people who barely knew us. Mostly Burke's circle, corporate types with 2 white teeth and names that sounded like prescription drugs. Chandler, Devon, Maris. They came bearing expensive gifts and empty laughter, talking about quarterly reports and organic fatherhood models. I didn't belong, and that was the point. Jeannie clung to Burke's presence like a schoolgirl. I caught her brushing lint from his shoulder, adjusting his collar, laughing at things he barely said. She only glanced at me when she needed something fetched or moved. Harold, can you carry this inside? Harold, where's the extra folding chair? I had become invisible, functional, forgettable. But that was her mistake. I had spent the past month quietly connecting dots. Behind the scenes, I compiled a digital folder, emails from her work address to Burke's personal inbox, laced with romantic euphemisms. Medical records linked to his private insurance plan. Photos of them together at places she told me she was visiting her aunt. All of it time-stamped. All of it saved. And the piece de resistance? A voice recording. 2 weeks prior, I'd caught Jeannie on a call. She thought I was asleep. In the recording, she said, and I quote, "Harold's just convenient. He makes everything legal and clean. But once the baby's here, Burke and I can offer him a severance package and send him packing." Severance. Like I was a temporary employee in my own marriage. I downloaded the audio to a small Bluetooth speaker and tucked it beneath the centerpiece of the dessert table. I'd rigged it to a remote I kept in my pocket. When the moment came, when the room was full and Jeannie raised her glass to give her speech, I would press the button. But not yet. I needed her to feel safe, triumphant. I needed the moment to be perfect. So I wandered among the guests, holding a tray of mini quiches, smiling politely at people who looked through me. The more invisible I was, the more powerful I became. And as Jeannie took the mic, lifted her glass, and looked toward Burke with teary eyes, I felt my thumb slide over the remote. It was time. Jeannie tapped her glass with a silver spoon, a glimmer of smugness behind her stage-ready smile. "I just want to say a few words," she began, eyes scanning the room, pausing dramatically on Burke. "This baby, this miracle, is the product of love, trust, and vision." She let those words hang in the air, as if expecting a standing ovation. People raised their glasses. Burke beamed like a man who had conquered both the boardroom and the bedroom. And me? I was in the back corner, forgotten, holding an untouched cup of punch and the remote that would end this charade with the press of a finger. Jeannie continued, "Modern families don't always follow old rules. We believe in honesty, in building something new from courage and connection." And with that, I pressed the button. The room fell into a low hush as the Bluetooth speaker under the cake table clicked, then crackled. At first, people glanced around, confused, murmuring. Then came her voice. "Harold's just convenient. He makes everything legal and clean. But once the baby's here, Burke and I can offer him a severance package and send him packing." Silence. Frozen jaws. Raised eyebrows. Burke's smile slipped like a mask cracking. Jeannie's champagne flute trembled in her hand. Her face went pale, then flushed red and fast-forward. That's out of context," she said, voice shaking. "Go ahead," I said, stepping forward. Calm. Dead calm. "Explain the context of calling your husband a disposable tool to a man you've been sleeping with behind his back." Gasps. Whispers. I didn't stop. "While we're on the topic of courage and connection, allow me to share with you all a little gift of my own." I pulled out my phone, clicked a button. The TV behind Jeannie, previously cycling through baby registry photos, now displayed screenshots. Her messages to Burke. "We'll spin the story. Harold's too meek to fight back. Once the nursery's done, he'll be completely boxed in. Emotionally neutered." Neutered. People were now full-on staring. Some recording. Others awkwardly sliding away from Jeannie and Burke like their moral filth might be contagious. Jeannie was stammering, sweat beading at her temples. He must have broken into my... "Nope," I said coolly. "You left your laptop open one too many times. And while you were building a nursery for Burke's spawn, I was building a case." Burke tried to step in. "Okay, that's enough. Sit down," I snapped. "You're a CEO. You know what happens when someone violates a corporate morality clause, especially with timestamped proof. Those hotel stays, Burke, paid on your company's dime. HR's going to love that. That shut him up." I turned back to Jeannie. "You built this entire narrative on the assumption that I would roll over, that I'd raise his child, hand you the keys to my life, and disappear quietly." I stepped closer, my voice dropping. "But I'm not disappearing. You are." And with that, I reached into my coat pocket and handed her an envelope. She opened it. Inside, divorce papers, and a notarized letter from my lawyer stating that all assets tied to her betrayal, the house, the The shared bank accounts, everything she assumed was hers, were now under legal review, frozen pending court investigation. Oh, and one more thing, I added. Burke's wife sends her regards. Another gasp. Jeannie's lips parted, stunned. Didn't know she hired a private investigator last month, did you? I turned to the guests. Thank you all for coming. I think we've reached the real crescendo of this chapter. And then, I left. Walked out the door while everyone stood in stunned silence, the pieces of their perfect future cracking beneath their designer shoes. I didn't look back as I walked away. Not when Jeannie shouted my name. Not when someone knocked over the dessert table. Not even when Burke came stumbling after me, shouting something about lawyers and misunderstandings. I just kept walking, out of that house, out of that chapter, out of that life. And you know what? The sky never looked so clear. It was an instant peace, of course. The weeks that followed were filled with paperwork, phone calls, and long walks where I had to remind myself that breathing was still allowed, that I wasn't a ghost anymore. I was real. I had survived her. The divorce was swift, cleaner than I thought it'd be. Jeannie tried to fight it at first, but once the legal team combed through everything, the manipulation, the deceit, the money trail, her options evaporated. Burke, predictably, disappeared. Rumor was his board forced him out. A resignation letter masked as a new direction in life. I got the house, the car, even the dog, though he was technically hers. But none of that was the win. The real victory came the day I found myself sitting alone on my porch, the sun setting behind the trees, a cup of strong coffee in hand, and I felt nothing but calm. No bitterness, no rage, just stillness. I started doing small things, things I used to love. I picked up my old keyboard from storage, dusted off my model trains. I even joined a community group for local musicians, just to be around people who didn't see me as Jeannie's husband or the guy who got played. And that's where I met Avery. She wasn't flashy. She didn't sparkle with danger or ambition. But she listened. She had eyes that didn't judge and a laugh that didn't feel forced. We started with coffee, then walks, then late-night phone calls that stretched until dawn. One night, I told her everything, the whole twisted story. She didn't gasp. She didn't pity me. She just reached across the table, touched my hand, and said, "You're more than what happened to you." And I believed her, because by then, I wasn't the weak man who let himself be erased. I was Harold, still standing, still here, still healing. And for the first time in years, I wasn't surviving someone else's choices. I was living mine. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more jaw-dropping true stories. Got a betrayal story of your own? Drop it in the comments. We might feature it next.